This video should at least have been nominated for a Golden Globe in a category something along the lines of Greatest Pallywood Productions of the Year. It's a debate, panel, whatever, published, hosted by Al Jazeera. It's moderated by the one and only Mehdi Hasan. I don't know if I'd say a big joke. I think he's a lot more dangerous than he is a joke. He's a pro-Hamas propagandist who, to his credit, he makes a pretty solid effort of bothering to try and appear to pretend to be relatively neutral, moderate, not entirely biased. Of course, the mask comes off here and there, but, you know, props to him for making an effort. The real star of the show is Diana Buttu, who is a real joke. Garden variety, cookie cutter, Pallywood propaganda activist. Says a whole lot of nothing with a lot of big words and a lot of performative emoting and all of that. And we'll have a look and see, and I'll have some more comments to share at the end. But the part of the video that's really hard to watch is Daniel Levy. It really hurts the heart to see the confusion. And I hope he finds some healing. Anyways, let's have a listen.
We have Diana Buttu, who's a Palestinian lawyer in Israel, former advisor to the PLO. Emmanuel Navon is an international relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University. Daniel Levy is a former Israeli peace negotiator, president of the US Middle East Peace Project. Diana, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about genocide, because we started the show talking about genocide. Benny very adamantly says it's absurd. There's many definitions. You're a lawyer. What do you make of that?
Look, Benny is exactly what I expect him to be, which is a genocide denier and a genocide apologist. Every human rights organization has been defining this as a genocide. We have the ICJ that has come out and said that there's plausible case for genocide, and yet we're to believe the Israelis, the only people who say that it isn't a genocide. Israel's allowed to be a colonizer. Israel's allowed to do what it pleases, and that Palestinians just have to sit by idly and take it. And this is the fundamental problem with Zionism. But we, Palestinians, are the ones who feel Zionism on our bodies. We've paid for it with our lives. We've paid for it with our land. This attempt to redefine Zionism will go nowhere, because you know, and the world knows, it's a colonial...
Hold on, I'm going to bring in all the panel, then I'll let you...
It's a colonial...
Hold on. All right. Emmanuel, you teach international relations in Israel. Is there a recognition there that a lot of the world governments, allies of Israel, as well as the usual human rights groups, are very critical, at a minimum, of the way that Israel has prosecuted what's going on in Gaza?
Well, first of all, Diana said we're feeling Zionism. You're right, you're feeling it, because the only place in the Middle East where Arabs are free is Israel. And so the freedom that you have, Diana, is because the only country in the Middle East where there is freedom is the state of Israel, from which you benefit, and you should be thankful for it.
I'm not grateful at all.
Because the only country in the Middle East where Arabs can elect their officials, be elected, be judges at the Supreme Court, be president of a university, the only free country in the Middle East is Israel.
Dan, do you want to respond to that?
I find it staggering that the gentleman to my right is telling the Palestinian citizen of Israel how she is experiencing the reality under which she lives. It's a staggering moment for me. Now, you know, there were different strands to Zionism, okay? There was a cultural Zionism, there was a binational Zionism. This could have gone in different directions. From the perspective of 2024, 75 plus years in, the idea that this is just something benign doesn't match with the reality that has been lived. Now, I would say it's clear what this has meant for Palestinians, but I would argue it's not doing what was written on the tin for Jews either. I don't think either Israeli Jewish or global Jewish safety is best served by the actions we see day in, day out in Gaza.
Would you like to respond to what you've heard from the panel?
Please. I think there's a misunderstanding here. There is a separation between Israel and the West Bank, Israel and the occupied territory, largely populated by the Palestinians and the State of Israel. In Israel itself, there is a rule of law. There is generally equality between the Jews and the Arabs, and you're misrepresenting it when you say that they are persecuted. And he's damn right in what he says. All the Arab states are dictatorships which do not allow their citizens any freedom. And Israeli Arabs enjoy most of the rights. They may be discriminated against in certain things, but they may enjoy certain rights which Jews do not have. For instance, not serving 3 years, wasting 3 years in the army, for example. Israeli Arabs don't do that.
We don't want to do
no,
yes.
it's fine.
Yes,
I'm pretty sure most Palestinians are
Yeah.
desperate to serve in the Israeli military right now.
I'm sure
Thank
you're
you
right.
for relieving us from
do.
One should
Some
be
do.
in pre-1967 Zionism in Israel. It was not a colonial enterprise. In the West Bank, there is a colonizing and colonial framework, which is even apartheid-like in its actual workings. But in pre-1967 Israel, that was not the case. And for the first 100 years or so of Zionism, it wasn't a colonial venture. It wasn't a venture of an extension of an imperial. Let me just define colonialism, since you're so busy defining genocide. Imperialism and colonialism were matched together, in which an empire sent its children to dominate and take over a third world country and exploit its riches
not
and its
South
people.
Africa.
This is
My
not what
father didn't
Israel
lose
did
his land.
until 1967.
Emmanuel, do you agree with Benny that there is a colonial aspect, an apartheid-like aspect to the occupied West Bank?
No. Zionism is a national liberation movement that freed its land from Arab Muslim colonialism. How do you think Islam expanded itself from the Arab Peninsula to Indonesia, from Indonesia to Morocco? Not from the Holy Spirit. This was conquest and colonialism.
This is exactly the problem, is that he's a racist. He espouses these racist views. That's the problem with Israel. Israel is a society, a country that is based on this idea of Jewish supremacy, and anything that they do or say goes, which means, therefore, that as a Palestinian who lives in that country, who is not enjoying any benefits of so-called democracy, that they get to espouse and tell me how I feel. They get to make statements like we are a fifth column, and they actually treat Palestinians as though they are a fifth column. It's very important, Mehdi, for people to understand that Israel came to us. We didn't immigrate to Israel. Israel's a colonial movement, and as a colonial movement, its aim is to not only get rid of Palestinians, but it's to transform the entire place, to erase and replace.
Okay, Emmanuel, I want to ask you this. Do you recognize the shifts that Benny was agreeing on at the start of this segment about what's happening inside of Israeli society?
Well, allow me to respond to what Diana just said. She's not telling the truth. What she's saying is not true. First of all, the Jewish country, I mean, there are over 190 states in the world. Most of them are nation states. It's not about supremacy. It is about national self-determination and freedom. Now, we didn't come to you. This is our land.
No, it's not.
This is a Jewish land.
The way that the state was created was
our
through
land.
the
And
ethnic
first of all, when you
cleansing
take we
of
came to you, it's not. I did not interrupt
including
you.
my family.
Diana, let him finish his point, Diana.
Okay. First of all, when you say we've been there for hundreds of years, the word Palestine, it's an invention of British colonialism. It was invented in 1920. It did not exist under the Ottoman Empire.
Again,
so when this story starts, it's a colonial invention. So when you say Palestine, and you can't even pronounce it in Arabic because there's no P in Arabic, that's why we say Philistine, right?
There's no J in Hebrew.
All right.
We did not conquer.
All right, Emmanuel.
So, I mean, right from the outset, at the very beginning, Mehdi, who is in an attempt to, to give Diana credibility and to make her sound credible and important and respectable and some sort of authority, says that she's a lawyer in Israel and an advisor, a former advisor to the PLO. And here, not only does he completely destroy her credibility, he takes off his own mask as a pro-terror undercover activist, because the PLO, the credible, internationally credible representative of the Palestinian people, represented presently by the PA, by the Palestinian Authority, that currently has an official governmental fund called the Palestinian Authority Martyrs Fund that pays monthly stipends for life, either to terrorists or if they die in the act of terror, to their families in perpetuity, a monthly stipend in perpetuity for acts of terror against Israeli civilians. They literally are paying now monthly stipends. The PLO is currently paying monthly stipends to the families of people who have broken into Israeli homes and slaughtered babies, slit their throats in their cribs on Friday night on Shabbat while families were sleeping, slaughtered the entire families. People that brutally murder Jewish civilians of Israel, Israeli civilians in general, them or their families get monthly stipends in perpetuity from the PLO. So sorry to disappoint you, Mehdi, and sorry to disappoint you, Diana, but being an advisor to the PLO is not a mark of credibility. It's a mark of being quite literally pro-terror, pro the murder of Israeli civilians in their sleep, babies, women, families. So that's not something I would be advertising if you're trying to, to promote your sense of credibility. But I guess it is what it is. They've said the quiet part out loud. So, and Diana starts talking, and like all of Pallywood propaganda, it's just pure performative nonsense. She's got the perfectly timed eye rolls and all of the drama and all of the practiced sing-song. Like, he's exactly what we expected. He is a genocide denier, and she goes on and on with all of her practice, body movements and the sing-song and the eye rolls, which is, why I suggested that she should be nominated for a Golden Globe. And, every human rights organization, every human rights organization like who? The Red Cross, who hasn't even made an effort since October 7th to visit one of the Israeli hostages in Gaza, none of the Israeli babies who were kidnapped by barbaric terrorists on October 7th and have been in captivity for 70% of their lives in dungeons in Gaza. The Red Cross hasn't made a single effort to try to see them, to find out if they're alive or healthy. That's the human rights organizations that cry genocide. I'm sorry. Cry me a river. And the ICJ. The ICJ is very credible. The ICJ, part of the UN, a branch or whatever it is, a department of the UN that has issued more statements against Israel than against Syria, Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea all combined. Very credible. If the ICJ and all the human rights organizations have said it's credible claims of genocide, it must be credible, because none of them have shown any anti-Israel bias. None of them have shown any pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, pro-terror, pro-murder of Israeli civilians bias. Cry me a river. And she just goes on and on with all of the performance, bleeding these talking points that mean nothing. They carry all of these strong words, and all of these strong words have completely lost meaning because they use these words every 14 seconds, and everything is genocide, and everything is colonization, and everyone is a colonizer and apartheid and blah, 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 blah. And so genocide doesn't mean anything anymore. In practice, colonizer doesn't mean anything anymore. Apartheid doesn't mean anything anymore, because anything that Miss Pallywood propagandist doesn't like is genocide and colonization and apartheid and blah, blah, blah. So none of those words mean anything, but she keeps on bleeding them like a good sheep. Bah, bah, genocide, bah, colonizer, bah, on and on and on and on. We feel Zionism on our bodies. We paid with our lives. Paid is right. You know how you paid for Zionism? You paid with the monthly stipends that the PLO that you consulted for, that you advised. The PLO pays monthly stipends to people who slaughtered Israeli babies and women families in their sleep, in their bed while they were asleep, break into their houses and literally slit their throats? Yeah? The monthly stipends that you pay to those people and their families, that's how you've paid for Zionism. So sorry, not sorry. Not sorry about your payment. Seriously, and she just goes on and on and on. And in her response to Emmanuel Navon, she says that she's not grateful. I'm not grateful. Of course she's not grateful. You know who else wasn't grateful for the things that Israel did for them? All the people, all the Palestinians in Gaza. When Israel withdrew in 2005 completely, and Israel's own government ethnically cleansed Gaza of Jews, forcibly removing every single Jew who lived in Gaza, and left behind millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of functioning greenhouses and irrigation that those Jewish communities had set up to produce food, to be sources of food. And what did they do? The second they left, Hamas came along and destroyed them all, smashed them, burnt them to the ground. Talk about ungrateful. Yeah, Israel gave them greenhouses, gave them technology, and they weren't grateful. And she's not grateful for any of the things she has as a female lawyer in Israel that she couldn't have anywhere else in the Middle East. Frankly, I'm not surprised that she's not grateful. And then it goes to Daniel Levy, which is, this part is really sad, really, really disappointing. But I mean, for whatever reason and however he ended up here so confused, the depth of his bias is so clear. First of all, at the very opening in the video, when Diana is introduced, you see him, fawning in adoration, looking at her with a look of adoration in his eyes at this person who, was an advisor to the PLO that pays people still today who've murdered Jews in their sleep for the past decades, fawning over her in adoration. So, the depth of his confused bias is already clear. And then when he's responding to Emmanuel, and he refers to him without looking at him, the gentleman on my right, in third person, without naming him, without any identifying, anything that identifies him as an individual. The gentleman on my right, he has so much disdain for someone that dares, stand up for the safety of Jews in Israel. And the honestly pathetic misrepresentation, the pathetic way that he completely misrepresents what Emmanuel Navon said, and you see how he's just bought into all of this garbage trash of all of these movements that just tell outright lies and spout and repeat outright lies that everyone knows are lies. The people spouting them themselves know they're lies. They just repeat them enough that they they gaslight themselves and they start to believe them. And then it becomes virtuous to spout lies. And the bigger the lies you spout and the more times you spout them, and the bigger the words you use to spout them, of colonization and blah, 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 the more virtuous you are. And for some reason, unfortunately, he's bought into that whole narrative. And he says, this gentleman on my right is telling this Palestinian woman how she is experiencing her reality. No, he's not. He didn't say how she's experiencing her reality. He called her out for outright lying about how she experiences reality. He's not telling her, he's not mansplaining her or Jew-splaining her about her experience of her reality in Israel. He's calling her out for being an outright blatant liar. And and then he goes on and he says, well, the current state in Gaza the safety of Jews in Israel and Jews around the world is not served by the daily events in Gaza. You don't say. The safety of Jews is not served by thousands of barbaric monsters breaking into Israel on October 7th, shooting babies one at a time in point-blank range, burning elderly people alive in their cars, And it gets even worse, believe it or not, and I'm not going to continue. I don't know if YouTube's going to let this video get around as it is. Yeah, it doesn't serve the safety of Jews in Israel or around the world. You know what else doesn't? Hamas putting Palestinian civilians in harm's way, putting their headquarters under a hospital, storing weapons in schools and in camps and homes filled with children, intentionally maximizing the number of civilian casualties. And it doesn't help either all of the corporate media just buy in and completely buy into Hamas's narrative and blame it all on Israel, when it's literally a strategy that's being implemented on the daily by Hamas. And yeah, as a result, you have people who appear to be of Middle Eastern descent on the streets of Melbourne, Australia, firebombing cars in Jewish neighborhoods. And, and all of these protests, all of these anti-Semitic attacks around the world. Yeah, the daily events in Gaza, Hamas putting Palestinians in harm's way, Hamas murdering almost 1,500 Jewish civilians in a day on October 7th. And then there are videos that some of them took of themselves calling their parents and celebrating how many Jewish civilians they killed. Yeah, that doesn't serve the safety of Jews in Gaza or around the world. Yeah, you don't say. Could have fooled me. And then it goes back to Diana, and she, of course, calls Emmanuel a racist. Why? Because he states a historical fact that Islam spread around the world using violence. Brutal violence. That's how it spread, with brutal, violent military conquest. He doesn't make any actual judgments about the statements of judgment about the morality of the religion or the ethnicity of Arabs, or he doesn't actually make any judgment at all. He just states a historical fact that if you want to talk about colonization, Islam, the community of Muslims, largely historically, have been probably the greatest colonizers of all time, spreading across the globe with brutal, bloody, violent conquest. He doesn't issue a judgment. He doesn't say it's right or wrong. He just states a simple fact. But if you state a fact that doesn't serve Diana Butu's narrative, then, oh, he's so racist. He didn't make any assertions about any people. He didn't say anything about anyone because they're Muslim or because they're Arab. He just stated a historical fact in response to her, calling Israel colonizers because they're colonizing land Jews are colonizing land that's been theirs historically for thousands of years. He just literally stated a historical fact, but that makes him a racist. And this is exactly why racist is on the top of the list of words that don't mean anything anymore. Racist stopped meaning anything before colonizer and occupation and genocide and apartheid, and all of those lost meaning. Racist was the first word that lost any meaning at all, because it just became every third word in every sentence of everyone who feels aggrieved, and everyone and anything that doesn't align with their narrative is racist. So it doesn't even mean anything. Let her state which part of his statement is not true. He didn't make a generalization. He stated a fact. If you could show that the fact that he is stating or asserting is actually incorrect, and argue that the reason he stated that incorrect fact is because he's racist, maybe, go ahead, make your case. But you're going to have a hard time doing that, and he didn't make any generalizations about anyone, so what's racist about the historical fact that he stated? Oh, racist. Jewish supremacy. Oh, yeah. The state of Israel is about Jewish supremacy. Yeah. With Muslim Arab judge on the Supreme Court of the state of Israel and several Arab parties. Jewish supremacy. Seriously. Throwing around these words. That's another one. Jewish supremacy doesn't mean any... Well, I don't know if it doesn't mean anything yet, but it's on the way. It's on the way. It's catching up, really fast. And then, probably the greatest lie of them all, And the one that's the most telling of what a fake person and a complete and total liar she is that she says she's not enjoying the benefits of democracy. Really? I'd like to see her show up on the streets of Tehran just wearing that red top that she's wearing in this video. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see her try to practice law on the streets of Tehran and see how that goes for her. Not enjoying the benefits of democracy in Israel. It's the only country in the Middle East where she could practice as a lawyer simply by virtue of having a second X chromosome, just because she's female. But she's not enjoying the benefits of democracy. She couldn't wear the clothes she wears anywhere else in the Middle East. She couldn't have the job that she has anywhere else in the Middle East. She certainly couldn't advocate against any other government in power anywhere in the Middle East and still be breathing the next morning. And she can and does do that in Israel. So please explain how you're not enjoying the benefits of democracy. What a just pathetic, performative, lying snake.